Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Justinian the Great restored the Roman Empire. First of all, let's discuss about Justinian. Who was Justinian the Great? Well, probably some of you may know who he was because he was a very important person, and I'm very sure that we have a few Byzantinophile people who are watching this video, so I'm sure that you already know who he is. But even so, let me explain and talk a little bit about him for the people who maybe don't know about him. Anyway, Justinian the Great was the Eastern Roman Emperor from 527 to 565. He is seen as one of the most, if not the most important, Eastern Roman or Byzantine emperor. It is interesting to note that he was a Latin speaker, so he was not a Greek-speaking person. And his origins are from a peasant family that had Illyro-Roman or Thraco-Roman origins. Basically, he came from a very Romanized family and not a Hellenized one. His name Justinian is derived from his uncle Justin. His uncle Justin was a commander of the imperial guard units before becoming an emperor. And he brought Justinian to Constantinople, where he gave him also an education. Justinian was well educated in jurisprudence, theology and Roman history. All of this would mark his reign. He made also very important reforms for justice, for instance, or the judicial reforms, by establishing the Corpus Juris Civilis. He was one of the first rulers who said that his rule was legitimized by God, the Christian God. So he had the right, because of God, to rule over the empire, and interestingly enough, he was the one who actually wanted to restore the Roman Empire. He basically never gave up his main interest, and whenever he could change something in his way, he would do so, mostly in justice, religion and expansionism. Justinian the Great was not the only one who was great. Actually, many other people should be taken into the consideration for the achievements that were done throughout the rule of Justinian the Great. His wife Theodora helped Justinian to keep the crown. He also knew and had Belisarius and Narses, who were legendary generals and the best of that time. Tax collection was optimized. Many sources about his rule still survive, thanks to Procopius, for instance, and also now forgotten other people who helped him as well. Justinian's main dream was to restore the Roman Empire, but the war against the Ostrogoths, well, it totally destroyed all the further ambitions that the Byzantine Empire could have. And then we also had the plague. The Eastern Roman Empire had many disastrous wars around them, especially with their eastern neighbors, and then money was sent everywhere. So his successors, they had then troubles to keep up with what they had to do later as Byzantine emperors. But what if all of that changed? What if Justinian the Great was able to restore the Roman Empire? This new Roman Empire would be very different, and they would have very different ways of living in this new Roman Empire. But let's see how this new Roman Empire would come back. I agree that Justinian actually somehow restored the Roman Empire, because realistically speaking, he took over Rome and Italy, the main parts or the original parts where the Roman Empire was born. The war against the Ostrogoths were so disastrous that Italy got almost depopulated. So let's assume that the Byzantines, they were able to have a lot more success during 535 and 540. A point of divergence I propose is that Justinian would give enough money to his army, and thus his army would not breach the agreement that they had with the Goths. without the need to collect money elsewhere by plundering, for instance, villages and cities. The Ostrogoths, they would fall under internal issues, and the more of Italy would be intact. The plague, yes, it would still devastate much of Byzantium, but not only Byzantium. And with that in mind, and without any bigger and more troublesome war with sieges and stuff like this, I think that more people could survive in Italy. Belisarius and some of the army could be sent back to the eastern border, for instance. And with a quicker end of that war, the Sassanids maybe would not declare war on the Byzantines in 541. And if they do so, I believe that the Byzantines, they could still somehow win, because they just had very, very competent people in that time. One problem the Byzantines may face would be the Franks. But if they would be able to keep a good defensive line, and if they had at least someone like Narses, for instance, or Belisarius in that region, the Franks wouldn't be able to pose a big threat. With a secure position in the eastern front and a good defensive position against the Franks, consecutive battles against the Franks could be won. And because in OTL the Franks suffered from heavy losses in the Battle of Vulturnus, I think that this would turn out to be very good for the Byzantines. Justinian, being Justinian, would also have excellent diplomatic skills, and this would come in very handy. After winning against the Franks, and later on the support of a Visigothic general, Byzantium could clean up the Mediterranean coast, and much of France and Spain, they would be annexed by Justinian, or they would freely go over to Justinian. He would let smaller independent parts of the Franks and Visigoths fight each other, so that he could then intervene on behalf of a faction that he would support, and probably like this he could then somehow be able to again gobble up and conquer most of these parts that were Roman once in a time. This will have a positive effect, because Byzantium would be able to connect all the parts around the Mediterranean like a puzzle, step by step. The Lombards in OTL didn't conquer all of Italy, although they were a big threat. Despite the bad shape of Byzantium, they were still not able to conquer all of Italy. And with a stronger Byzantium, more money and more power on their sides, Byzantium could either beat the Lombards in many battles, or they could just pay them off. Italy will develop more, and Venice won't become an important trading post due to the butterflies involved. Now, don't get me wrong. While Justinian and his generals are doing all of that, they will still have wars with the Slavs. They will later on still again have the wars against the eastern neighbors like the Persians, and then much later on they will also have problems with the Vikings. The Slavs and Bulgars will at first be able to have some success, but their foundation would be similar as the ones that the Avars or the Gepids they had. With that said, the Bulgars would eventually disappear when the Hungarians invade Europe, and the Hungarians will mix into a Romanized and Slavicized population, because Pannonia wouldn't be as depopulated as it was in OTL. The Magyars will still cause problems, the Hungarians, but I don't see them forming a cohesive diplomatic relationship with other enemies of Byzantium. The big winner of this would be Moravia, because Moravia was actually the predecessor of the Bohemian kingdom, and I think that this Slavic kingdom, it could be able to survive, and they could take in a similar role as Bohemia. Britain and Ireland will not get any focus, as this part would not be of value, and Britain and Ireland would fall under the Vikings. Another very important butterfly effect we can see is that the Sassanids would not suddenly get up until Egypt or modern-day Syria. But due to the shift of power, the Sassanids or any other Persian successor state would get Mesopotamia back. Mesopotamia would be the battleground between the Romans and Persians, and with more wars depopulating it, a city like Baghdad would never evolve in there. Moreover, without the repressive tax policies of the Sassanids, the peoples of Egypt, Syria and Palestine still support their Roman overlords, and the Arab invasion will not be that successful in there. But they could still break into many parts and devastate Syria and Palestine, for instance. Much of the wealth from these parts would be transferred to Anatolia or Egypt, and the trade routes could take a detour to the Caucasus, the Black Sea and Crimea. The Persians will collapse earlier and at a much faster speed, because once the Arabs attack, Rome will take advantage of it and have all of the Caucasus, and as a result most of the Black Sea, and get income from the trade in there. With the preservation of much of Italy and the evolution of Spain like in OGL, with growing cities, trade and key figures like Isidore, we would get an earlier Renaissance. Of course, it wouldn't be the Renaissance as we know it by now, but it would be some type of Renaissance. As for France or Gaul, I can't really predict what would happen in there, but I think northern France, the lowlands and the Rhineland would become like a frontier with a more warrior-like people. Limited feudalism would exist in those places and also in the areas that border the caliphate. Without the key authority of the Pope, it is possible that more people could freely make arts, science and literature, but that depends on the emperor and the local authorities. With the butterfly effect and a stronger position of Byzantium, iconoclasm wouldn't become an issue, and it is possible that Christianity without this new Roman Empire would become more tolerant. Some regions like Egypt, Greece and Spain, also Italy to some degree, would still be centers of culture and economy, with Carthage and the Black Sea being very close as well. The culture of this entity would be unrecognizable, but also change over the time in so many ways that I can't even predict it. The Germanic tribes and states, they will be a very wild card in here. Some may join the Romans, others may stay independent and become something akin to a duchy, and Poland, Moravia and Denmark would have high chances to have more territories within modern-day Germany. Christianity would still spread, but to a less extent, and in general it would be less conservative, as there would be no need to reclaim certain countries and regions. Instead, it could spread like Buddhism did in Southeast or East Asia, only that Christianity in here would spread all over Europe, and maybe also in limited ways in Northern Africa and also some parts of Asia. The Vikings would not dare to come near to the Byzantines, at least in the Mediterranean, because of the Greek fire. The Caliphate could have moments of strength, but then also moments of weaknesses, giving Rome many wars while the western part could be pretty peaceful. This would all end with the arrival of more tribes from the steppes, especially the Mongols, who would crush the Caliphate and go deep into Anatolia and crush the Eastern European countries. And in here we will see how the Roman Empire would react. Will they just pay off the Mongols, or eventually also collapse? Or will they use a reverse card and expand to greater heights never seen before? And that's where we leave it for now. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.